The scent of warm bread and cinnamon drifted through the doors of maple and rye. A cozy downtown cafe nestled between a faded bookstore and a flower shop blooming with hydrangeas. Autumn had painted the sleepy town of Ashbrook in golden strokes, and the trees along the sidewalk were heavy with amber leaves waiting to fall. Scarlet. Emerson sat alone in her usual window seat, her planner open beside a half-empty cup of tea. She wore a burgundy coat and soft gray scarf, her red curls tucked into a loose bun. Her fingers tapped thoughtfully on her pen. Trying to balance budgets for the community arts center, she managed her passion project, and lately her biggest source of stress. Funding was tight, volunteers were scarce, and tonight she'd be hosting their annual fundraiser with barely enough energy to fake a smile. But she refused to give up. The arts had saved her once, back when her life had unraveled after college. Now, she poured every hour she had into making sure the center did the same for others. The cafe door jingled, and with it came a gust of wind and a man with unruly dark hair, black-rimmed glasses, and a worn leather camera bag slung across his chest. He scanned the crowded room and, seeing no other open seats, made his way toward Scarlett's table. "Excuse me," he said, voice deep but unsure. "Do you mind if I—" Scarlett looked up. Her eyes locked with his for a brief, electric second. Those eyes, blue-gray like the sky before a storm, and unexpectedly familiar. "I don't usually share," she replied cautiously, then added with a wry smile. "But today might be the day I break my own rule." He smiled, charming and crooked. "Appreciate it. I'll try not to steal your muffin or ruin your vibe." She raised an eyebrow. "You've already disrupted the silence. There's no going back." "Now," he chuckled as he slid into the seat across from her. "I'm Elliot Rhodes, by the way." Scarlett's heart did a tiny flip. The name rang a bell, but it couldn't be. Scarlett Emerson? His brows lifted. "Scarlett, as in from Emerson High?" "You're that Scarlett?" She tilted her head. "And you're that Elliot?" A pause, then a burst of laughter. "You used to sit behind me in calculus and doodle album covers in your notebook." He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guilty. I also got a D in that class." "Well, you passed, barely." "I remember because I tutored you. That's right." He looked down at the table, shaking his head. "Wow, it's been, what, 10 years? "Longer," she said softly, caught off guard by the sudden rush of nostalgia and something else she didn't want to name yet. Elliot had changed. The lanky, distracted boy had grown into a man who carried both confidence and something heavier, maybe loss. Or maybe just years spent chasing things he hadn't quite caught. They spent the next few minutes catching up. He was a photojournalist now, recently returned from South Africa after a long assignment, and now back in Ashbrook to help his father recover from surgery. He hated staying still, but loved going home. Scarlett shared her story too, how she'd stayed close to home, taken a different path, and fought hard to build a creative refuge for kids and dreamers. Their lives had taken opposite directions, but something about them now felt unexpectedly parallel. "I'm actually photographing local spaces for a feature on small-town revitalization," he said. "Places with soul, heart." Her eyes lit up. "You should visit the Ashbrook Arts Center. That's yours." "I run it. Tonight's our fundraiser, actually. Not that I expect miracles, but I'm trying." He leaned back, studying her with something more than admiration. "Maybe I can help. A good photo story can work wonders." She hesitated, unsure. "I'm not looking for charity." "I wasn't offering charity," he replied. "I was offering curiosity. And maybe a little redemption for that D in calculus." That made her laugh again, as he stood to leave. He paused. "Would it be weird if I stopped by tonight?" Scarlett hesitated. "Then weird?" "Yes, but maybe a good kind of weird." He smiled. Good, I'll take my chances. And just like that, Elliot Rhodes stepped back into her life, not as a mistake, not yet, but as the echo of a past she hadn't realized she missed Dot as she watched him leave. Scarlett's hand lingered on the edge of her planner, her notes suddenly forgotten. Maybe today wasn't just about saving the art center, Dot. Maybe it was the start of something she hadn't planned at all, Dot. Something that felt like more than a coincidence. Something that one day might be the most beautiful mistake she ever made. The next morning, the town of Ashbrook glimmered under a delicate frost. The sky was pale, the air crisp with the scent of chimney smoke and pine. Life moved slowly here, with a kind of comforting rhythm that allowed people to know each other's names. Stories and heartbreaks. Scarlett Emerson walked through the quiet halls of the Ashbrook Arts Center, flipping on the lights one by one. The gallery was small but warm, full of colors and imperfect dreams. Local children's paintings were proudly framed next to aspiring artists' charcoal sketches. The place was more than a center, it was her mission. Years ago, after losing her mother to cancer and putting aside dreams of studying fine arts in New York, Scarlett had thrown herself into keeping this center alive. She had watched the building crumble, raise grant money by selling cookies and paintings, and cried with joy when they first opened their youth mentorship program. This place wasn't just a building, it was healing in brushstrokes and clay. Scarlett's life revolved around the art center, her close-knit circle of friends, and her weekend visits with her father, a retired literature professor who now wrote short stories and lived alone on the edge of town. She had made peace with the quiet of her world, even if sometimes, in the late hours, she wondered what it might have been like to leave. Across town, Elliot Rhodes stood in his childhood bedroom, now half converted into an editing space. Boxes of prints, faded travel journals, and rolls of undeveloped film cluttered his desk. His world had been vast for the last 10 years, moving from country to country, chasing conflict in human stories for major publications. But with his father's recent surgery and a promise made in a hospital hallway, he had agreed to return. Home just for a few months. Long enough to help, long enough to catch his breath. What he hadn't expected was how strange it felt to be still, or how familiar it was to walk down streets lined with memories he hadn't thought about. Scarlett Emerson in years, not really. But seeing her yesterday had jolted something in him, like suddenly finding a photograph you didn't know you'd missed. She wasn't the girl from high school anymore. She was sharper, stronger. Tired, maybe, but deeply rooted. And beautiful, in the way that stayed with you. That afternoon, Elliot visited the art center with his camera. Scarlett, flustered and exhausted from post-event cleanup, met him at the front entrance. "I thought you were just being polite," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I was," he grinned, "but then I decided to be curious, too." He explored the space with careful eyes, snapping candid photos of forgotten corners, paint-smudged easels, shelves of old sketchbooks, handmade paper stars dangling from the ceiling. He asked questions, real ones, about the kids, the funding, the stories behind the murals on the wall. Scarlett watched him, guarded at first, but it was hard to stay closed around someone who saw details others missed. When a teenage girl named Marley, one of the center's shyest students, nervously approached Elliot to ask about his camera. He knelt beside her like a peer and showed her the settings. "She's brilliant," he said later, when Scarlett walked him to the door. "She's been through a lot," Scarlett replied. "They all have," Elliot nodded. "That's what makes this place matter." Something in his voice made her pause. It wasn't just admiration. It was understanding. In the following days, they saw more of each other. Not planned, but not entirely accidental either. Scarlett found him photographing the local bakery at sunrise. He found her sketching in the town park during her lunch break. He brought her chai from the cafe without asking. She left fresh scones for him at the center's front desk. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about her mother, silence that followed her loss, and the way painting had helped her survive it. He shared stories of a child he'd photographed in Morocco, of villages that taught him more than school ever did, and of the loneliness that followed even the best assignments. Their lives had been so different. Scarlett had built something slowly, piece by piece, never leaving. Elliot had chased the horizon without ever staying long enough to watch a season change. But beneath all that, they understood each other more than they realized both had been. Caring too much for too long, the days that followed unfolded like a quietly written love song, no dramatic chorus. Just the gentle rhythm of two hearts falling into step. Elliot began volunteering at the Ashbrook Arts Center in small but thoughtful ways, repairing broken shelves, photographing student art pieces for their online portfolio, even helping Marley build her own website to showcase her paintings. Scarlett never asked, but he was always there, showing up with his sleeves rolled up and that disarming, crooked smile. Scarlett started to look forward to the sound of his knock, the way his presence changed the shape of her day. They weren't dating, not officially. There were no candlelit dinners or romantic declarations. But there were coffee runs, shared laughter over burnt popcorn during movie nights at the center, and a quiet understanding that grew in the spaces. Between their words, one evening after a long day of community workshops, Scarlett found herself seated beside Elliot on the back steps of the center. The sun was setting in a splash of honey gold across the sky. They watched it together, the silence easy, full. Elliot broke it gently. "You ever wonder what life would have been like if we'd stayed connected?" She gave him a long, thoughtful look. "All the time," she admitted. "But maybe we're ready then." He turned to her, voice low. "And now?" Her pulse fluttered. "I'm not sure I'm ready now either," she whispered. "But for the first time in a long time, I want to be." His hand brushed against hers, not a grab, not a move, just a question. She didn't pull away. That moment lingered between them, soft and full of longing. They spent a rainy Saturday working together on a new mural project. The kids painted while music played in the background, and Elliot snapped photos of their messy joy. At one point, Scarlett ended up with paint on her cheek, and before she could wipe it off, Elliot reached over and gently did it for her. "You've got a little masterpiece there," he murmured, fingers grazing her skin. Scarlett blushed. Occupational hazard. Their eyes held for a second too long. Later that afternoon, when thunder rolled outside and the last of the students had gone, they stayed behind cleaning brushes and humming along with the record player. Scarlett stood barefoot on a stool, reaching for a top shelf. "You're going to fall," Elliot warned, studying the bass. "I've got this." But the moment she turned, her foot slipped. She let out a surprised yelp only to land right in Elliot's arms. Neither of them moved. "You okay?" he asked softly. Scarlett's heart pounded against her ribs. "Yeah, ... I think so." Still holding her, Elliot looked down into her eyes. There were no jokes, no easy lines. Just two people standing on the edge of something terrifyingly real. Then slowly, cautiously, he leaned in. Their kiss was soft, hesitant, like a confession made with closed eyes. But when they pulled apart, neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The feelings had been there for weeks. This moment only made it undeniable. From that day on, things shifted. They walked closer, talked deeper, stood a little too. Long in doorways, exchanged glances that said everything their lips couldn't yet. But with the sweetness came tension, an invisible thread, pulling tighter as they grew closer. Scarlett was afraid of letting herself fall. Elliot was afraid of asking her to catch him. One night, after a small exhibition at the Arts Center, they stayed behind cleaning up. Scarlett looked at one of Marley's newest pieces, a painting of a girl with flowers blooming from her scars, and felt her chest tighten. She painted her healing, she said quietly. Not her pain. Elliot stepped beside her, kind of like you. Scarlett turned to him. You see too much? I've made a living doing that, he said, then added, more gently, but I don't think it's a mistake. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into his arms, needing his warmth more than words. They didn't speak of what they were. They didn't label it, but when she leaned her head on his shoulder that night, and he rested his cheek against her hair, the room didn't need definitions. It was enough to just be. Winter came early to Ashbrook, dusting the rooftops with frost, and slowing the town's heartbeat. Inside the Ashbrook Arts Center, warmth bloomed, not just from the space heaters humming in the corners, but from the growing closeness between Scarlett and Elliot, a quiet intimacy that deepened with every passing day. They were no longer just crossing paths or working side by side. They were beginning to share life. Elliot had begun to stay later, sometimes helping reorganize the old storage closet into a reading nook, sometimes painting with the kids, but often simply because he couldn't bring himself to leave. One evening, Scarlett found a handwritten note on her desk after closing, for the one who turns blank walls into stories. It was taped to a small sketch he had done of her laughing with Marley. She pressed her fingers to the paper, heart fluttering in her chest. Their late-night talks became routine on the steps of the center, under street lamps as the town quieted, or walking through empty parks with coffee in hand. The conversations grew deeper, less about plans and more about dreams, less about logistics and more about scars. One snowy night, they sat across from each other in Scarlett's apartment. The fireplace crackled, casting amber light across the room. Do you ever regret not leaving? Elliot asked her, his voice low. She thought for a long time. Sometimes. But stay and let me build something that mattered. Not just for others. For me too. He nodded, watching her with something tender in his eyes. And you? She asked. Do you regret going? I think I regret not having something to come back to. He admitted. The room felt smaller then, not in a suffocating way, but in that sacred way when two people finally see each other fully. Scarlett crossed the space between them, sat beside him, and said nothing. Her presence was answer enough. They began to weave into each other's routines. Scarlett invited him to her father's weekend story readings at the library. Elliot helped fix the center's broken projector and stayed to watch an old black and white film with her and the kids. When Scarlett caught the flu, Elliot showed up at her door with soup, tissues, and a stack of graphic novels. You're kind of annoying when you're sweet, she teased, voice raspy. Just keeping you humble, he replied, tucking a blanket around her shoulders. Moments like that chipped away at the distance they'd once maintained. Trust blossomed in the smallest things, shared meals, long drives with music humming between them, the way they reached for each other's hands without thinking. One night, Elliot brought Scarlett to his favorite place in town, an old train tunnel covered in street art, now abandoned and overgrown with vines. He'd taken photos there in high school and came back to shoot whenever he was home. I never showed anyone this, he said, clicking his flashlight on. Scarlett stood in the quiet, gazing at the faded murals and poetry scribbled across the walls. This place is heartbreak and hope at the same time, she whispered. Exactly. She turned to him. Thank you for bringing me here. He looked at her for a long time. You bring color to every place you enter. Even the broken ones? She stepped closer. So do you. You just don't notice it. That night, he kissed her again, but this time it wasn't tentative. It was sure, anchored, full of unsaid promises, and Scarlett let herself believe, for the first time in years, that maybe she was allowed to have something this beautiful. Later that week, they spent a Saturday painting a mural with the kids, this one about transformation. Butterflies, rising suns, open hands. The children laughed and made a mess of color, but Elliot and Scarlet worked side by side in perfect rhythm. At one point, she wiped a streak of green from his jaw with her thumb and said, "You're becoming part of this place." "I was afraid I wouldn't fit here anymore," he confessed. "You never stop fitting," she said, her voice soft. "You just had to come home to see it." The mural dried, but the meaning stayed fresh. That evening, they sat on the rooftop of the center with 2 mugs of cider, wrapped in a shared blanket as the snow began to fall. Scarlet leaned into Elliot's shoulder. "I've always been careful," she said quietly. "Careful not to want too much, not to get used to people staying." He kissed her temple gently. "I've always been careless with time. But not with this, not with you." She looked up, eyes wide and vulnerable. "Then let's not make promises." "Let's make choices," Elliot nodded. "Every day. I'll choose this." "I'll choose you." Snowflakes landed softly on her curls, and the stars above glimmered like silent witnesses. In that moment, there were no what-ifs, no shadows, just warmth, just honesty, just 2 people falling not recklessly, but deliberately. Together. The joy of falling in love is often quiet, built in layers, moments, and unspoken glances. But even the strongest bonds are tested when the outside world begins to press in, reminding hearts that love alone isn't always enough. By mid-January, the Ashbrook Arts Center had gained unexpected attention. Elliot's photo essay capturing its vibrant murals, student stories, and Scarlett's impact was published in an online magazine with national reach. It brought in praise, attention, and complications. Emails poured in. Journalists reached out. Donors wanted interviews. And with that came pressure, new expectations, offers of expansion, and suggestions from people who didn't know Ashbrook, who didn't know them. Scarlett stood in her office, holding a proposal from a well-funded nonprofit offering to partner with the center in exchange for rebranding it as a regional arts program. It sounded impressive, but reading it felt like someone was asking her to give up the soul of what she had built. Elliot walked in as she stood frozen by the window. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said gently. "I think I have," she replied, holding up the proposal. "This ... changes everything." His brows furrowed as he read. "Isn't this good news?" "It should be, but they wanted to move the center. Change the leadership model. They want control." Elliot. He paced slowly. "It's still a chance to grow." Scarlett's voice was quiet but firm. "I didn't build this for someone else to rewrite it. I built this for our town, for kids who don't have anywhere else to go." He didn't answer. Not right away. Later that night, as they sat on her apartment couch, the silence stretched longer than usual. "You're scared of losing what you've built," he said softly. "I'm scared of being erased, Elliot. This place saved me, you know that, I do, but maybe letting it grow doesn't mean losing it." Her eyes shimmered with something fragile. "You've always had the freedom to leave, to rebuild. I haven't." That hit deeper than either of them expected. The next day, Elliot received a call from his old editor in New York. A foreign desk position was opening long-term, full-time, a major opportunity. He had to give his answer in a week. He didn't tell Scarlett right away. Instead, he wandered through Ashbrook alone, past the bookstore where they had shared hot chocolate, the frozen pond where they watched lanterns rise, the tunnel covered in art and memories. Everything suddenly felt like it belonged to her, and somehow to him too, but his entire life had been shaped by chasing stories beyond the horizon. Staying in Ashbrook felt like standing still, like giving up the version of himself he'd spent years building. At the center that evening, he found Scarlett alone, sweeping glitter from the floors. "I got an offer," he said quietly. She looked up. "A position back in New York, big one. It's It's what I thought I always wanted. Scarlett set the broom aside. Are you going to take it? I don't know. You should, she said softly, but her voice cracked halfway through. Scarlett? She looked up at him, eyes wide, full of questions he couldn't answer. Don't want you to stay because of me, she whispered, and I don't want to go and wonder what would have happened if I stayed. For the first time since they had begun, they didn't know how to find each other in the space between words. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. Scarlett buried herself in preparing the center's spring workshops. Elliot disappeared into his photography, taking long drives to clear his mind. Neither of them said what their hearts were screaming. Don't leave. Don't give up. On the fifth night, Scarlett stood at the tunnel where they had shared their first real kiss. Snow dusted the ground. The spray paint on the walls had faded just slightly. She stared at a line Elliot had written weeks ago, still barely visible. The bravest thing I ever did was come back. And beneath it, in tiny red marker, a new line had appeared, one she hadn't written. The hardest thing I might do is stay. Her breath caught. He had been honest. And so had she. But maybe that was love, not perfect choices, but honest ones. Not never leaving, but choosing to return. Later that night, Elliot stood in front of her door with an envelope in his hand. Inside was a copy of the New York offer with the word declined scribbled across it in ink. I didn't want to tell. I chose you, he said. I wanted to show you. Scarlett's hands trembled as she held the paper. Are you sure? I've never been more terrified, he admitted. But yes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Then I guess it's my turn to be brave, too. They stood in the doorway, the cold swirling around them, their hearts finally aligned again. They weren't without fear, but they had chosen each other, and that would always be enough. Ashbrook's annual spring fair was approaching, a town tradition Scarlett had once helped revive, full of music, local art, and warm apple cider stands. This year, the Ashbrook Arts Center was front and center, chosen to host a live youth showcase and community mural unveiling. It should have been a dream come true, but the days leading up to the fair were laced with tension. Despite Elliot's decision to stay, the space between him and Scarlett remained bruised, delicate. They talked, they smiled, but there was a quiet distance neither of them acknowledged. It wasn't coldness, it was caution, like they were afraid to touch what still felt so breakable. Scarlett had spent so many years being strong, holding others up, holding herself together, that she didn't know how to be soft and vulnerable at the same time. She didn't know how to ask someone to stay. Elliot, on the other hand, was learning how to stay, how to be still in one place with one person, and let love grow not from adrenaline or change, but from steadiness and trust. On the night before the fair, they worked late at the center, stringing lanterns and organizing supplies. Scarlett stood beneath a half-finished arch of flowers, arms crossed, heart heavy. Elliot approached quietly. This looks amazing, he said. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. I know I've been off lately, he continued, gently. I'm still figuring out how to be someone who stays. Scarlett finally looked at him. I'm still learning how to let someone stay. A pause, full of breath and heartbeat and unsaid things. Sometimes, she said slowly, I wonder if I pushed you away without meaning to. And sometimes, he admitted, I wonder if I've made you feel like you're not enough to hold me here. She blinked fast, trying to steady the storm building inside her. I don't want to be the reason you gave up everything. He stepped forward. You're not the reason I gave anything up. You're the reason I chose something better. Scarlett swallowed hard. And what if I still mess this up? Elliot gave a faint smile. Then we fix it together. There it was. The moment. The truth. The beating heart of their love. She reached out, finally taking his hand. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. he said, pulling her closer. But I've never wanted anything more than I want a life with you, not just weekends or seasons. I want morning arguments and grocery lists and painting with you at midnight. I want your chaos and your calm, all of it. Tears spilled from her eyes as she nodded. You have it. You always have. The next day, Ashbrook came alive with music and movement. Kids danced under fluttering ribbons. Parents snapped photos. And the new mural, painted with dozens of community hands, gleamed with color and hope. Scarlett stood in front of the crowd and gave a speech about courage, healing, and the power of art to bring people home. Elliot stood beside her, camera in hand, pride in his eyes. When she finished, applause echoed across the town square dot, and in that moment she didn't just feel proud. She felt seen. Not as a woman holding everything together, but as someone finally letting herself be held. Elliot wrapped an arm around her shoulders as lanterns rose into the sky at sunset. Do you think we'll ever stop being scared? She asked him softly. No, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. But we'll never stop choosing each other either. And that, they knew, was the bravest thing of all. That summer arrived like a slow exhale in Ashbrook's soft evenings, warm breezes, and a quiet that settled in people's bones. The town had changed in small but meaningful ways. The Ashbrook Arts Center was now buzzing with new energy. Its once cracked windows were replaced with stained glass made by the kids. The once empty walls were covered in color, stories, and hope. Scarlett stood in the doorway of the center one evening, watching Marley lead a group of children in watercolor painting on the lawn. The sight made her heart swell because this was the dream. Not just hers, theirs, behind her. Elliot wrapped his arms around her waist. You keep staring like it's not real, he whispered. I still can't believe it is, she replied. Leaning into him, their relationship had grown into something neither of them expected, but both had always longed for. It was slow, kind, rooted in deep conversations and shared routines. Saturday pancake mornings, long walks through the farmers market, evenings spent reading next to each other on the couch, legs tangled. They still had their differences. Elliot loved clutter. Scarlett needed order. She liked planning months in advance. He lived by his camera strap and spontaneity. But they learned how to navigate it with humor, grace, and the unwavering choice to stay. One night in early July, Elliot brought her back to the mural tunnel where it all began. The space had been cleaned up and softly lit with solar fairy lights, thanks to a community project. A single easel stood in the center with a blank canvas dot. Scarlett looked at him. What's this? I thought maybe we could paint something together, he said. Taking her hand, they dipped their brushes and painted side by side in silence. No grand design, just shapes, colors, and heart. When they stepped back, it wasn't a masterpiece, but it was theirs, chaotic, imperfect, vibrant. Elliot turned to her, heart in his eyes. I spent years chasing stories, Scarlett. And then I realized the best one was the one I almost missed, you, us. Her breath caught as he pulled a small box from his pocket. I want to mess up dinner with you. I want to hang crooked frames and argue about which shelf books go on. I want to raise paint-streaked kids and get old watching you, teach them how to see beauty in the broken. Will you marry me? Scarlett didn't cry. Not because she wasn't overwhelmed, but because, for once, everything felt right. Steady. Safe. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. They married beneath the blooming cherry trees in Ashbrook Park that fall, surrounded by friends, laughter, and the quiet strength of a community that had watched them grow. Scarlett walked barefoot down the aisle, wildflowers in her hair. Elliot wore suspenders and a crook smile that said, forever. Their vows were simple and honest. I once thought loving you was a mistake, Scarlett said. But now I know it was the bravest, truest thing I ever did. Elliot took her hands. You gave me home in a way no place ever could. I will choose you even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. They kissed as golden leaves, danced in the wind, and everyone around them cheered. Years later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, their daughter, paintbrush in one hand and glitter on her nose, asked them how they met. Scarlett smiled at Elliot. By accident, she said, or maybe fate, he added. But definitely the best mistake we ever made, they said together, and then they laughed because love, in the end, was never about being perfect, Dot. It was about staying, Dot, choosing, Dot, and creating something extraordinary from all the messy, beautiful moments in between.